Welcome to our November meetup. This is going to be our last meetup of the year, and I'm very pleased to be able to, in a short moment, introduce you to our speaker, Margot Bloomstein. And I just have a few organizational matters first. So as some of you that come here regularly know, and those of you that are joining for the first time might not know yet, we're a UX writing meetup and content design meetup that's originally based in Zurich and Bern. But we've been online for about 1.5 years now. And as we've just seen before in the chat, because we're online, there are really people from all over the world here, which is really quite cool. And the meetup itself is run by Fiona, Tam, and me. We're 3 language enthusiasts with all some kind of different connection to UX and UX writing. And we're going to be moderating this event today. So basically, the agenda for today is that we're going to have a talk by Margot. And then after that, we're going to do a Q&A. And as always, this is usually a quite valuable part of the meetup where people tend to get all sorts of, interesting stuff out of our speakers and be able to really pick their brains. So what we're going to be doing is that the 3 of us will be facilitating this Q&A. So feel free to type your questions in the chat as they pop into your head as Margot is talking, and then Fiona, Tam, and I will be collecting them and asking them to Margot at the end. So you, Margot, so you don't have to keep an eye on the chat. We will be doing that for you so you can focus on your talk. And then after the Q&A, we're going to do 1 or 2 speed networking rounds where we send those of you who do want to stay here into breakout rooms so that you can also connect with some people and talk to other people. This is obviously entirely optional. You do not need to stay around for this. And needless to say, this also won't be recorded. So we're only recording the talk and the Q&A part. Apart from that, I also just want to quickly give a shout out to our supporters. We have, as of recently, a Ko-Fi page for our meetup. And some people have already bought us virtual coffees, which is really awesome. So if you're here and you've done that, then a big thank you to you. And to the others here, if after or during the meetup, you sort of notice that you're really enjoying this and you'd like us to keep doing this, then please consider buying us a virtual coffee. This helps us cover our license costs. But it also allows us to do things such as the book raffle that we're going to do today, which is my not so perfect segue into introducing you to today's speaker, which is Margot Bloomstein. She probably doesn't need a big introduction. She's a well-known voice in the content strategy industry. She's the author of the 2012 book, Content Strategy at Work. And she's just recently also published a second book that's called Trustworthy: How the Smartest Brands Beat Cynicism and Bridge the Trust Gap. And of course, she's also here today talking about that topic, about designing for trust. And so because of that, we are going, as mentioned, to give out a copy of her book to 1 lucky attendee. And if you want to win that copy of Trustworthy, all you have to do is post a tweet within the next 24 hours that contains the hashtag #TrustworthyBook, and where you also tag our meetup's Twitter account in the tweet. So that's at UX Writing Meetup. And I think Tam or Fiona are going to drop that info also into the chat. So if that was a bit fast, don't worry, it's going to be in the chat as well. And we're then going to select 1 lucky winner of you. But for now, we're here to hear Margot, and I'm going to, without further ado, leave the floor to her and let her talk to us about designing for trust.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be talking with you all today. And I admit when the organizers, when Lara and Fiona and Tamara, when you all reached out and invited me to speak, I was really excited to speak to an audience from Zurich and Bern, and now seeing how so many other folks are online as well. I think when people were piping up as to from where you were joining from, I saw Cedar Rapids and Nigeria and Brazil and Frankfurt. And that is, I think, really, really thrilling, because it speaks to how our profession, how the broader content profession has continued to grow. and not just content strategy, but also UX writing, content design, technical writing, how all of those kind of sub-disciplines and related disciplines, and I'm not going to get into the argument over what's a sub of what there, content marketing too, how those things have all continued to grow, and then how we've continued to grow across the world. And that is incredibly exciting, because I think it speaks to the fact that the work that we do is a challenge and is a need everywhere. Good communication is a challenge and a need everywhere. And I think we've seen, maybe especially over the past few years, how the quality of content, good, trustworthy content and information through which our different audiences can use to self-educate, whether we are working in financial services or in the political arena or in public health or in retail, how in all of those industries and everything in between, there is a real value in good, high quality content that people can use to fuel their confidence. And I'm going to be talking about that a lot today, that relationship between content and confidence. And hopefully kind of in the middle of those is trust. So we're going to be talking about that, I think, through a few different lenses. And I'm just going to pull up my slides now and join you that way. I'm going to come to you here in Europe in sort of a virtual way, I guess, but you'll notice it's actually Europe from way back. It's an older map. There's a reason for that. We'll dig into that. But I want to talk to you about content today, because as I said, I think that it is a global problem. Content and trust are global issues, and they're everybody's problem. And I think a solution to some of our issues with trust and content, that solution is most definitely our responsibility and our opportunity. So when we talk about that, I think we also need to talk about vulnerability. So we're here today to get vulnerable. And vulnerability is what we're talking about when we talk about things like transparency or empathy or authenticity, when we talk about building trust with our audiences. I want to talk about how we operationalize vulnerability. In other words, how we change our work style, the tactics that go into UX writing and content design and content strategy, how we change them so that something like vulnerability isn't just a buzzword, but so that we actually use specific tools to amplify how we find trust, how we build trust with our audiences. And I think at a fundamental level, we need to first acknowledge that I'm here, you're here today, because our audiences don't trust us. They don't fundamentally trust many of the institutions that we represent, maybe in some cases the industries that we represent and support. And I think, though, that's true for most people. We don't trust most of what we hear anymore. And that's because over the past decade, people have grown a lot more cynical. In retail, in government, in software, in healthcare, you've probably noticed how a lot of marketing falls flat. A lot of the good work that we do falls flat. Sales cycles take longer. Most messages don't really seem to motivate action. And that isn't just because of the pandemic. People don't trust brands on face value the way they used to. But I don't think we can blame them either, because across industries, across national boundaries, across countries, our audiences have endured failures of leadership. Maybe it's deception or inconsistent messaging from government or from brands that they thought that they once knew. And when people don't know who to trust and then decide not to believe anything, that's when they grow cynical. And today, in an age of fake news and hidden agendas, cynicism can oftentimes seem safe, not just in the political arena or when we're evaluating different media sources, but in many other industries that we support too. This is a problem that affects all of our industries. Because when people turn away from experts, when they take refuge maybe in their filter bubbles, they eventually start to turn inward. And that's where we see even bigger problems. that's when they start to distrust their own gut instincts as well. And they lose confidence then in their ability to make good decisions. And I think that's where we can help them. That's where we, people in content of all stripes, can help. Because to regain our audiences and rebuild their trust, we need to rebuild their confidence and empower them to make good decisions. We need to affirm their hope and their interest in learning and their enthusiasm for feeling knowledgeable. I fundamentally believe that those are still common undercurrents in all audiences and in all societies. We all think that we can get a little bit smarter. That takes vulnerability, though. That takes vulnerability on the part of the different brands and organizations that we represent in our writing styles, in our methods of creating content. And there's a few other factors at play there too. But now it isn't a new problem. So I want to go back pre-internet, pre-industrial revolution. I want to go back actually to commerce in pre-Renaissance Europe. Because the stuff that we struggle with around trust and communication, people in the 1500s struggled with that too. We can have some compassion there with folks in the 1500s, because then the need for information, for trustworthy information, was changing. So previously, people who sold goods, maybe candles or cloth or salt, they would haul their wares from town to town in a region, maybe to markets and fairs and whatnot. But in the Renaissance, that's when we started to see trading families and empires that began to grow as they realized that they could actually reap greater profits, not by going to all those different fairs and markets, but instead by staying put and instead engaging in arbitrage among multiple cities and countries. So the scale was getting a little bit bigger, much like what we've seen over the past 10 years online. So the catch, though, for the success of those different trade merchants, the catch was that they all needed information that they could trust about their different target audiences in those different cities. They needed to know that they could rely on information about what was happening in other countries. So that brings us to this guy. Now, I know you can see kind of like the scraps of paper there up on the wall there behind him. They represent like early Post-it notes. Clearly, this is one of our first information architects. Actually, no, he's not an information architect. I like to think that he is. He kind of has that vibe about him. No, this is George Geese, and he was a Renaissance era trade merchant. And he represents this emerging merchant class who ran export and import businesses across all of Europe at the time. Now, that kind of work, as I said, it took specialized knowledge about the cities in which he wanted to operate. So to make good decisions and to feel good about the decisions that he was making, people like him would rely on people that lived in those foreign cities to write him periodic updates about the economic conditions. That's what he has pinned up on the wall there behind him. Those are letters. So they would employ these people that lived in those foreign cities to write to him about the competition, maybe palace intrigue, or if there was talk of going to war or not. And those letter writers, those correspondents, those foreign correspondents, in many ways, they were the first journalists. And a journalist would empower merchants by giving them consistent details, a unique perspective, as well as by sharing their openness to learning and listening and maybe correcting what they were learning as they went along. So they didn't overpromise to know everything. They would never be sending out letters that said, I'm the only person you can trust on this. Don't pay attention to any other sources of information. No, they didn't overpromise to know everything, but instead they offered their vulnerability kind of as a service to hold themselves open to listen and learn and always grow as they took in new information. So they kept themselves open to new information in addition to offering authority and consistency. Consistency in the tone of voice in which they were writing, so they didn't sound overly alarmist at times, as well as the volume of information they were sharing, the level of detail. So the people to whom they were writing, those different trade merchants, would understand where they needed to pay more attention and where they could maybe kind of pull back a little bit. Now, that idea of authority and consistency, that's something that we still trust today. That's something that we still value because it empowers us too. It empowers us to make better choices about what we buy, where we shop, where we eat, how we vote. All of those things that are really, really important today were important back then too. So they established authority, as I said, by sharing a unique perspective with the right depth of context and sharing how their knowledge was constantly growing. You can think of that as a unique voice, the right volume of detail, and a sort of strength that comes through vulnerability. It's saying, I'm here, you're not, so let me tell you about it. And that idea of saying, I'm not here, or you're not here, but I am. So I'm going to share what I know. I'm going to share what I've learned. That is the idea that is central to authority. And authority comes from being willing to go where your audience cannot, either because of the danger or the cost or the depth of experience or expertise it requires. Here in the US, when Anderson Cooper, one of the newscasters on CNN, when he speaks to us from a region that is in the depths of war or has recently suffered a natural disaster, we stop and pay attention and listen because he has the expertise to tell us about what he is seeing in a place where most of us can't easily go or would necessarily want to go. But authority isn't just about going to a war-torn region or about kind of experiencing danger on behalf of your audience. When David Chang, the owner and the chef of the Momofuku restaurant chain, he's now the star of the television series Ugly Delicious, when he brings viewers to see the sort of nexus of crawfish and Asian Cajun fusion food, again, people listen because they trust his wisdom, his depth of experience. At the same time, a voice and face that may be a little bit closer to home there. When SRF's Stephen Klaproth, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, when he speaks to an audience there, we trust his authority, his viewpoints, his depth of knowledge to empower people with information. His audience trusts his vulnerability too, that he's willing to learn, to engage in new experiences, maybe correct his own misconceptions and bring the audience along on that journey as well. So that idea of establishing authority through a consistent voice, the right volume of information, and a sort of vulnerability, I think that that's something that we can take a look at too. I think it has a lot of value and merit for our own work. So I've been looking at how their authority in many of those different figures, how it empowers and educates and respects us, because those are all figures that at least try not to speak down. They're not trying to gaslight their audiences or demanding absolute loyalty. And we reward that in the form of trust. I've been reading a lot from Jay Rosen, the press critic, on authority, and we can bring some of his thinking into our own work too, because when people or institutions or brands have authority, we tend to reward it with trust. I saw there was a comment that popped up there about Klaproth, and I won't say though that we always reward it in the form of trust without maybe some skepticism, without maybe thinking, I want to do a little bit more of my own digging on this topic. But there's a difference there between skepticism and cynicism, between saying, I'm not going to take this on face value. I want to keep doing my research, versus saying, everybody lies. I'm walling myself off from information. That's what cynicism sounds like. And I'd like to think that we don't have any cynics in this group. I think it's a lot of people, though, that say, I want to keep learning more. I'm not going to take it on face value. And I think that idea of taking it on face value, that's what we run up against now, because so many brands have been inconsistent or irrelevant. And when a brand starts to break from what we know or trust in their voice or subject matter, it can be hard to reconcile that with our own worldview. And similarly, if you don't provide your audience with content that meets their needs in terms of length and level of detail, that's when you become irrelevant as well. And those are issues that then stoke our cynicism. And as I said, we know what it sounds like when people get cynical. Those issues add up across all industries. People suffer a crisis of trust. We have problems today believing outside perspective and marketing and what we hear from government as well. And we see it, we experience it as consumers, as citizens, as readers, as shoppers. We used to place trust in familiar brands and established media. Maybe they were organizations that you grew up with because they reflected your reality, but we don't trust those same institutions anymore. Maybe because they've been inconsistent with what they promise, what they claim, or how they speak to us. And those inconsistencies, those sort of creeping inconsistencies, are a sneaky thing. And like us, our users do look at the world now with more cynicism than trust. And we can blame that kind of inconsistency in the media or politics. But it used to be that if you caught a politician maybe flip-flopping, that it would scuttle a campaign. That's not really the case so much anymore. Instead, we use other vocabulary to deal with it, to confront it. Because when institutions that we once trusted tell us not to trust the evidence of our own eyes, we have another word for that. That's gaslighting. And it affects our very ability to trust, both in other brands and ourselves, in our own perceptions. Think of that from the perspective of your audiences. If you work for an organization and maybe your audience is having difficulty trusting that organization, it may also be that they've lost confidence, not just in that institution, but in themselves as well. We have an opportunity and I think a responsibility to address both of those issues now. So here in the US, we definitely see how it plays out, where people don't trust their own judgment anymore. We see how it undermines elections. We see how it undermines public health. And that's a pretty dangerous thing. And I think, as I said, this kind of insidious cynicism, it undermines all institutions in journalism and government services and public health and every sector of the economy. But I think if you're in any part of UX, design, content creation, or professional communications, you know that this cynicism undermines your own work, but also trust that we are well positioned to address it too. So let's talk about how we address it. So I think the secret, the problem statement really for the future of our work is this: to regain trust, we must empower our audiences. And I think that we already have the tools to do that. Whether your audiences, whether your users are consumers or citizens or donors or voters, to regain their trust, we need to empower them. And by educating them and rebuilding their confidence in themselves and in their ability to self-educate and evaluate the quality of information and the accuracy of information, that's how we regain their trust in our organizations as well. So let's take a look now at what that could look like, because this brings us back now to the idea of authority. So even marketing is a form of authority. Yes, it isn't necessarily going into a war zone, reporting from there, but it's still saying, I'm here, you're not. So let me tell you about it. I'm sitting down the hall from the product development team. So let me illuminate the product roadmap for you. Let me tell you a little bit more about how it's evolving, what you can expect next, new feature sets and all. And brands that can teach us about their product categories, that comes from a position of authority. I think product descriptions that speak from a position of authority, they're able to do so because they're bringing new information to the reader, to the potential consumer, to help them make a more informed decision and feel good about the decision that they're making. In the same light, brands that put a stake in the ground around their values, maybe if they're choosing to prototype in public or demonstrate accountability when they mess up, or demonstrate how they're going to step up as a leader around different social issues that very much affect the business, resonate with the business, and happen to resonate with their audience as well. They're demonstrating those ideas from a position of authority. It's authority that takes a degree of vulnerability. It's not weakness, though. I think that's really, it's a strength. We're going to look at some examples of that. Because yes, we are in a difficult place right now. I think our broader society is in a difficult place right now. We see how the erosion of trust is affecting and undermining and weakening every industry that sells products or offers services or attempts to inform or persuade the audience. But I think there's hope too. And that starts by empowering our audiences, because if they are looking inward for answers, if they're turning away from other sources of expertise and looking inward, we can meet them there. So we're going to be digging into this from 3 different kind of angles: voice, volume, and vulnerability. And those are the same tools that those Renaissance era letter writers were using so well. So as I said, voice, volume, and vulnerability. I forgot to advance my slide there. Sorry about that. But we're going to dig into it through those 3 lenses. I've got a few examples that I want to share from kind of each of those angles. And then I think we'll have time to dig into questions as well after that. So voice refers to the distinct personality that manifests visually and verbally in everything a brand does. Do you project a sense of tradition or of innovation? Is your organization very witty and polished, or maybe more scrappy and creative? Your brand's voice is what helps your audience distinguish it from your competitors, especially if otherwise the only way you can compete is on price. After that, all that you're left with really is the brand. So if it helps the audience distinguish it from competitors, it can also help to humanize the organization and elevate what is most important there. It tells your audience who you are and how you are, and if you're somebody that they can trust. When a brand changes over time, though, maybe to pursue new offerings or changing its voice, it can run the risk of alienating its original audience. It's by using plain language to expose those changes that instead users maintain their confidence, not just in the brand, but in their own knowledge of where it's going. So again, it's telling the audience who you are, how you are, and really if they can trust what they know about you. So it goes back to that idea of confidence again. Now, the British National Health Service applies this kind of thinking beautifully. They're constantly streamlining their copy to translate plain language, to translate into plain language and clean up nominalizations. So to take technical jargon of the medical industry and translate it for an audience of lay people and patients, it demonstrates really their commitment to treating patients as partners in healthcare. In the back end of their content authoring system, they've adapted tools and included in their style guidelines direction to constantly prompt people to unpack content and translate it into plain language. This overall helps to improve the cause of health literacy, because they've directly tied health literacy, being able to understand treatment, talk in a meaningful way with your healthcare practitioner or doctor. They've directly tied that to health outcomes. And this means that in order to best serve patients, all of their content team needs to step up and do the work as well. Now, that idea of doing the work, doing the hard work, that means helping people author content better. So as I said, NHS offers editorial guidance and guardrails to prompt for meta descriptions and alt tags and encourage that translation to plain language. The look and feel as well mirrors that kind of blunt language, at times even breaking from more formal style guidelines. You can see here how they're implementing a very blunt and precise visual language with red callouts at the top to draw attention to immediate alerts, things that require an immediate response. And then they're using yellow at the bottom there for advisories, things that are a little bit more like kind of nice to know, good to know types of things. In that sense, they're echoing a common visual language that's used on everything from traffic signals to signaling that's used in other kind of high stress applications and industries where red typically means alert. Then they're also breaking things down in a pretty easy bulleted format so that people can easily scan for what they need, especially when they're in a more high stress health environment. When they're dealing with acute issues, nobody has time to read paragraphs. They do save paragraphs for other parts of the site when people are just looking to learn more about particular conditions or diseases, maybe when they're looking to help a family member that isn't in immediate distress, but rather when they're looking to build their own knowledge and get smarter. So in this way, they're never dumbing down information. They don't embrace plain language to make things simplistic, but rather they're meeting their audience kind of at their level and using them to kind of use the same vocabulary to bring them up to the level of the practitioners with whom they might be consulting. So they're not trying to dumb things down. They're trying to smarten people up, but that requires meeting them first at their level. So I think this idea of building on a voice that is consistent and familiar with your audience, meeting them kind of on their terms to introduce other vocabulary to them to help them use the vocabulary of an industry so that they can feel maybe a little bit smarter or a little bit more engaged with the subject matter. I think that's probably kind of table stakes for most people that work in our industry. It's certainly, with the rise of the plain language movement, a much more, I think, common and safe perspective within our practice, within our industry, and hopefully within many of the organizations that we serve. So if your brand's voice addresses how you communicate, volume refers to how much you communicate, again, in length and level of detail, both visually and verbally. So I'm talking about both long paragraphs as well as really information-rich diagrams and images where there's just a lot to parse in there. So how do you know how much to say on a particular topic? How many images do you include in a gallery? We know that brevity and bullets have ceded space to long form content, even on e-commerce sites. So how do you determine how much content is enough? I feel like that's sort of the big question that plagues so many of us and so many of our employers as well, particularly in social media. Well, it turns out the answer to enough oftentimes comes through in user research. You know, you've offered enough detail when your audience can make good decisions and feel good about the decisions that they make, when they can constantly and consistently report a sense of confidence in what they've done, a sense of completion in what they've done. And that's also something that we can measure through very quantitative means in customer feedback, the rate of return on products, on merchandise. Those are all indicators of, have people gotten enough information to make a good decision, or are they kind of hemming and hawing and hesitating about those decisions? So I wanted to share with you an example from one of the organizations that I spoke with extensively in working on Trustworthy. Crutchfield Electronics. They're a US-based electronics retailer. I think there was somebody on from Virginia, so I think that Crutchfield is actually probably local to you. And their website, if you check it out, you will see long pages. You can see there on the left side of your screen where I zoomed out on one of those pages, and there is a lot there. So long pages and lots of content types. If you're more of a visual learner and you want to be able to compare diagrams side by side on, maybe if you want to buy a new camera lens, or you want to compare different audio systems and charts detailing all their different specifications, again, side by side, you can easily do that with Crutchfield. If you want to see a video where they're taking apart an audio system to see like what the inside looks like, again, they can offer you that as well. And they see with these long pages and lots of content types, what happens when people reach the end of those pages. Turns out they oftentimes click to another page to keep reading more on the site. They spend a lot of time there. Potential customers spend a lot of time there before they even put a product in the cart. People take a lot of time to really get comfortable with their purchases there. The thing is, it isn't just about getting comfortable, it's about getting confident too. And in a world where media and politicians gaslight us into believing that we shouldn't trust ourselves, that we don't have the skills to gather information from good resources and to continually ask questions, smart brands can help us regain confidence in ourselves and in our ability to make good decisions, and in them, and in the strength of our society. Now, I'm not saying this as a call to feel like, yes, go out and do your own research for any sort of technical or medical type of decision, because I think that undermines the quality and the value of expertise in many of those industries. And we've certainly seen how that plays out now in a public health context, particularly around vaccination. No, this isn't a call to do your own research. This is a call to empower our audiences with the skills to evaluate content, determine if they're getting it from a good source, to arm them with high quality information and content, and then also be willing to say where we don't know what we don't know, where we can also say, here's what we're still trying to figure out, and how you can also stay abreast of evolving research in that area. And I want to hold on this for a second, because if nothing else, I want you to tweet the heck out of this message and sing it from the rooftops, because this is what organizations owe their users. We owe our users empowerment and education and confidence and trust. And those are no small things, but they are increasingly rare. So to go back to Crutchfield, we know that education drives empowerment. Empowerment drives confidence, and confidence drives trust. And we can call that customer loyalty if that's how you need to sell it internally. But this is also about how we create a smarter society and a stronger society where people feel like they can collect information from multiple resources and then feel like they can make good decisions based on what they're learning and the quality of that information. So one of my other favorite examples of organizations that publish a lot of content is America's Test Kitchen. You could say they cook up confidence. So America's Test Kitchen is a publisher based in the US that earns attention and love and loyalty because they're all about empowering their audiences with information, meeting them where they are in the right level of detail for the amount and their amount of content for their mindset, channel, and device. So that means that more novice chefs can find basic cooking definitions. More savvy chefs can find advanced cooking techniques and the history of particular ingredients. And that's across the television shows that they produce. There's a cooking school show. They rework recipes. There's 2 different magazines that they publish every year. A dozen different cookbooks. There's their Twitter feed, their Instagram feed. They're kind of everywhere. This is a publishing organization that happens to focus on cooking. And it's always optimized with content types that are right for specific reading and use cases. So that means if you are standing in your kitchen, just kind of on your phone, and you realize you need to make dinner, you can easily pull up a recipe on Instagram and find swipeable recipes there with immediately actionable photos where the explanation for every step in that recipe is reduced to just the caption on that photo. Whereas if you're sitting down with maybe their Cook's Illustrated magazine and you've got a couple hours to really kind of pour into it, that's great. They can meet you there as well. And you can read all about the history of particular cooking techniques or paragraph after paragraph that are mulling over the wisdom of different variables. And that's because with everything they do, there is a common thread. I had the opportunity to speak with their chief content officer, chief creative officer. And he explained how they're always investing in the appropriate level of detail to help people engage their senses in immersive education. So it's not about hearing from one famous chef. This isn't about ego, but rather about the science that fuels their publishing, that fuels their testing of different recipes. So they're selling empowerment, not a cult of personality. And that idea drives home this fact that for them, helping people be successful is what helps make them loyal customers. It's this idea that success breeds confidence. And when we help our users do well, when our content helps them maybe interact with government or their own finances or how they engage with our business, how maybe our business does work with their business, or helps them vote or helps them make a vacation plan. When we help our users do well, when our content helps them, maybe it makes them feel proud or smart or accomplished. And that's how they become more confident in both themselves and in the organization that kind of created that feeling for them. So we know that confident decisions take a certain amount of content. It isn't always, though, more content. And sometimes by imposing structure and pushing back, and this is kind of getting almost more into the area of content management, I guess, than content design or UX writing. But by imposing that structure, that's when we free our users to do what they need to do and then get out of there, get off of our sites. So that's something that gov.uk had to resolve. In the UK, it used to be that citizens could get government service information from some 9 different government websites, plus The Guardian. So in fact, for the official version of government information, people would oftentimes turn to the newspaper instead. So the government's answer to that kind of volume problem, I mean, 9 different websites, you can imagine the version control issues there. Their response to the volume and variety was refinement and editing, because they realized not all topics need more content to earn trust. Sometimes it means looking at a topic and saying, we shouldn't be addressing that with more content at all. That content is better the purview of someone else. Or let's streamline the content that we do have to really focus on the user's immediate needs and get rid of all of the other kind of cruft around it. So they adopted a mindset of paring things down to the essentials, of saying that government would only address the things that only government could address. And with that mindset, they went through a big content audit process, and the government design services team trimmed that content down from 75,000 pages that they maintained to 3,000 pages. So how did they know when they had enough content? Well, in that case, it again came down to user research. When they brought people into the lab and asked them to complete different tasks, the response that they frequently heard after going through this process was simply people saying, is that it? I guess I'm done. That's great. I didn't expect that government could be like that. But that level of simplicity and empowerment and focus, maybe that's what we most owe our users so they can feel more confident. You know you have the right amount of content when your audience can make those decisions quickly and easily, and then feel confident that they made the right decisions. And this idea of how we streamline content, the perspective that we use to streamline content, and in that case where they were saying that we should only create content on areas and on topics on which only we, the government, can create content. This is a responsibility that we have to our audiences, to the businesses that we serve, and ultimately to our content. This is kind of content management as an umbrella over content design and creative direction. And sometimes that's exactly the work that we need to do. Print publications oftentimes know the most about how to be concise and focused because they only have so many pages. That's all that they can afford. It's not like they're going to run out of HTML. No, they're running out of physical space on the page. And they walk a tough balance between offering enough content, but not too much so that they can ultimately build trust with their readers. A while back, I worked with Linton Sprungley in the United States on a challenge around building internal trust with their employees. So they had recently conducted an employee survey that revealed that many people there felt sort of detached, like they didn't really know the big picture of their own company. If they worked in merchandising or in the pack room or maybe in the stores, they didn't always understand how the product timeline, how different trade shows, maybe how product sourcing or the supply chain affected them. They didn't always know how their work affected other people in the company. And that was showing up even before that survey in the form of high employee turnover. A lot of people were leaving because they didn't really feel connected to the company. So they brought me in to help figure out how we could address this, how we could address this problem that people didn't understand fundamental parts of the organization, maybe what was happening in other parts of the organization as well. So we worked together to launch a new internal publication. They wanted some form of employee newsletter or magazine, something that would be able to help them articulate their values, but also help people understand what was happening in other parts of the company. It focused on clarifying all aspects of retail chocolate production, from sourcing and supply chains to design and packaging and merchandising. And it was just all in 16 pages that came out a few times a year. You can see it was glossy, full color, used custom photography. We met a tight budget to do all of those things by creating an editorial calendar at the beginning of the year so that we could forecast out all of the different themes and all of the different photography we would need, commission articles and commission photography so that we could kind of buy that kind of in bulk, I guess. And also look at to make sure that we were addressing all different facets of the company and plan for that appropriately. The publication that came out of that, the volume in it, meant really detailed images when we were showing like the inside of the pack room and how chocolate was coming out of big hoppers and being wrapped and bagged and put on pallets and how that would get out the door. Or when we were explaining like after it left, when it was going into big retailers, into different supermarkets, what those displays would look like and how they would work. We used really detailed imagery to explain that, as well as sentences that again and again unpacked technical terminology, whether it was the acronyms and the terminology of merchandising and trade shows or of chocolate production and different appliances that they would use for it. We're always explaining that so that anybody could pick this up, any employee could pick this up and understand that the company was investing in them, that they wanted everyone to feel a little bit smarter about their company. We were explaining things not to dumb them down, but to help people smarten up. We could measure the results of that. We were effectively measuring trust and loyalty and employee confidence by looking at things like the turnover numbers, by looking at how much longer people were staying at the company, the rate of retention, as well as by conducting that employee survey and asking those same questions again a year later of, do you understand what's going on in other parts of the company? How confident do you feel about your own knowledge of this industry? So really quantifiable aspects like that told us that people were gaining trust and confidence in their employer because they were gaining more confidence in their own knowledge of the business as well. So Lind's corporate leadership had to be vulnerable for that to work. We needed to be able to say, yeah, it's okay to share a certain about how this business works. And all of this work comes together then in vulnerability. So individually, a consistent voice and the appropriate volume of information, those are probably characteristics of good brand-driven content strategy and design. It's through our vulnerability that the efforts in voice and volume can unite to foster trust. So what do we mean when we talk about vulnerability? Well, for one, it's the risk that we take on for connection, I think interpersonally, as well as professionally when an organization is vulnerable. Vulnerability is the cost of transparency. It's the cost of being authentic. It's the cost of authenticity. And we fling around those terms, transparency and authenticity and vulnerability, but they have real meaning for our organizations, for the clients that we serve, if they're brave enough to embrace them. And that's what I mean by how we operationalize vulnerability. So will your organization risk possibly criticism or ridicule or really engaged customers, not necessarily enthusiastic customers, but really engaged customers, if it means eventually building greater loyalty from those customers and maybe even expanding to have more customers or building greater interest from critics in the press? I don't want to mistake vulnerability for weakness, because obviously that takes strength. The smartest brands grow even stronger though, and they gain trust by owning their mistakes, by prototyping in public, and by then acting on their values. So what this looks like then at a corporate level sometimes means putting a stake in the ground around your values. And we say this is like putting yourself out there in a corporate sense. So Penzeys Spices is a large spice retailer based in the US. And when you're a company and you put yourself out there like they did, that's how you find your community. So in the wake of the American presidential election in 2016, Bill Penzey, the owner of the Penzeys Spices chain, he took to Facebook to make clear that the company's positions on immigration and racism, they were not mirrored by the then presidential candidate who was stoking hatred for immigrants. He said that that runs counter to our company's purpose, which is bringing people together around cooking as an act of love. That's kind of their tagline. And for anybody who might have said, hey, Spice Boy, stay in your lane, talk about cinnamon, don't talk about politics, he doubled down on authenticity. He said, this is our lane because cooking is political. At least here in the US, so many of our family favorites, so many of our favorite recipes come here on the backs of immigrants. They tell the story of immigration to our country. Furthermore, they're flavored with spices that oftentimes come from regions that are scarred by war. When we're offering things like Aleppo pepper, well, that's coming from Aleppo. That's not just a fancy name, that's a place. And that's a place that should matter to us if our politics are invading that place. Now you can imagine there was quite a response to this. It was risky, it was vulnerable, and his position drew a lot of headlines and a lot of criticism. The company lost some customers. But then they saw how their sales spiked to record levels. That happened every time he would share something political from the organization, when he would share his political stance. They would lose some customers, but then gain so many more. Over the past few years, Penzies has actually enjoyed a 50% year-over-year increase in online sales. That's huge. And that happened because as more and more people would see his posts on Facebook and elsewhere, they grew to know the brand and to trust the brand. It was certainly speaking in a consistent voice. Their politics were pretty consistent. They were detailed with what they shared and why they shared it. And certainly they were being really vulnerable. And it turned out that people who previously didn't see themselves in the target audience of a spice retailer suddenly thought, you know, I may not cook, but I have friends and family that do. So maybe I'll be buying their Christmas presents there this year. They suddenly started getting a much broader audience that was coming there because they felt like they knew the company, they knew what to expect from the company. The company wasn't hiding anything about where its money was going or the different political issues it was supporting. It was all right there for judgment. Just as a point of contrast, their closest competitor, another regional spice retailer, they took a different approach. They offered a discount code that was all caps, no politics. They said that they thought that business should stay out of politics. But the idea of staying out of politics, whether it's an issue like immigration or fossil fuel consumption, effects on the environment and climate change, sexual harassment, the treatment of immigrants, any of those political issues, the idea to stay out of them, it reflects privilege that oftentimes isn't shared by the people who are most affected by a discriminatory policy. That's not to say that every company can chase after every issue and kind of glom onto it, because that's where we see problems around authenticity. But for issues that are central to how a company operates or how the majority of people at a company feel and how the people in their audience feel, it is almost imperative for companies to get involved. The most recent Edelman Trust survey showed that nearly 80% of consumers now do prefer to learn a little bit about the personal politics that are animating the organizations they support. They want to know how the money that they're choosing to spend is then being spent by those companies. And they do want people to speak out. They do want CEOs to speak out and make their politics known. The idea of not knowing, not caring, and saying that business should stay out of politics, that is falling by the wayside for many of the smartest, most engaged organizations today. So we can see how vulnerability, like voice, is an act that tells people who you are. It empowers them with information so that they can make more informed decisions about if they're going to do business with you, how they're going to do business with you. But we also know that this idea of vulnerability, it's risky. It's risky for a brand to put a stake in the ground. But perhaps it takes even more vulnerability for a business, for an organization, for a politician to acknowledge their deficiencies and ask for help. Maybe your company has screwed up. Maybe employees and critics and customers are demanding explanations and accountability. Your organization is at its most vulnerable when it's staggering away from those sort of mistakes. Maybe when you've been wounded by errors of judgment, reeling from jaw-dropping calamities. Maybe the CEO has done something really, really stupid in a really public way. Well, what comes next is what matters most. And the central question there is, do you double down on defeat, or can you embrace an opportunity to earn trust? So here on Zoom, that brings us to the subject of Zoom. So over the past year, Zoom has offered us a masterclass in vulnerability. In December of 2019, Zoom had about 10 million daily meeting participants. Most were business customers. Most of them had IT departments, most of whom had security protocols. But by March 2020, so by that point, we were saying the virus had reached pandemic proportions. Most of those 10 million daily meeting participants, they were now working from home. What Zoom saw was those 10 million users, they had jumped to more than 200 million daily meeting participants. And businesses had responded to COVID-19 by mandating that people work from home. Schools were embracing remote learning. Some 90,000 schools across 20 different countries had jumped on the platform. And everybody was having birthday celebrations and virtual happy hours on Zoom. It was friends meeting there and preschool teachers meeting with their classes and university professors and book clubs. And more people than ever before wanted the platform to perform in ways that it hadn't really been designed. And often they were doing it now without the guidance of an IT department, guidance like set a password to ensure that only people you invite can attend, or enable a waiting room so that you can screen your attendees. They didn't do that. And we probably remember a lot of the problems that came out of that. So enter the Zoom bombers. Now, the CEO, Eric Yuan, he could have called out those issues. He could have stoked people's anger. He could have just blamed the Zoom bombers. He could have just said, hey, everybody, you're using it wrong. This is your problem, not ours. But he didn't. So in April of last year, he wrote a blog post it's really a model in building trust through vulnerability. So he spoke in a humble but confident voice. He offered a volume of detail that really respected his audience. He said, I'm going to use some terms maybe in engineering or in security and privacy and tell you what is going on. And then he offered a level of vulnerability that brought his users into the process to ask them to hold him accountable. And he also apologized in the first person. He said, I am deeply sorry. We don't hear that too often from CEOs. But he said, I apologize. And then he explained what had happened. He offered detail again that demonstrated his respect for the audience's intelligence, and then pivoted to make this you're using it wrong kind of problem into an opportunity. That's not spin, that's smart. He talks about what we're going to do, what we anticipated, what actually happened. So then he's moving into the plural. Then he moved on to credit the community, to say that journalists, security researchers, they've helped us identify problems that were pre-existing, that we should have known were there. And then he offered a plan to hold him accountable for a resolution. First, he was going to be enacting a feature freeze to shift all of their engineering resources to focus on trust and safety and privacy issues. And by the following week after his post, Zoom had made those virtual waiting rooms and meeting passwords the default for all new meetings. He also detailed how he would be conducting weekly webinars and publishing a transparency report, and also submitting to third-party audits. His response was swift, it was specific, and it was transparent. So it makes it a powerful case study in how you can continue to earn trust, maybe even earn greater trust, even while business is confronting trouble. So voice and volume and vulnerability, they add up to empower people, to empower our audiences, to renew their confidence, and to rebuild their trust. And as we stumble back from a few years of gaslighting and cynicism, that's what people need more than anything right now. That's what our society needs, because we've lost trust in institutions that have lied to us or overpromised or brought us false bravado. But smart organizations can step into that void, not with more bravado, but with more details and explanation, and also being willing to admit when they don't know things, when they don't have all the answers. And I think regardless of your industry, your organization can be a leader in moving us forward. Because yes, it's easy to be cynical, and we have so many reasons to be cynical. Cynics look at the world as it is and say, it's worse. But I think designers and writers, we are builders of brands and brainstorms. We look at the world as it is and say, it can be better. And I think if you're hopeful that it can be, this is how we can work so that it will be. Because despite all of our reasons to be cynical, whether they are deceitful politicians or deceptive business practices, people still act with hope. We all think that we can become a little bit smarter if we scroll a little bit further, dig a little bit further into YouTube, or keep scrolling on Twitter. We think that we can become smarter or better or kinder. And right now is a time to affirm that kind of hope. Let's design our way out of cynicism and toward trust. I think that's what we in our profession, what we can do, what you can do for yourself, your organization, your users, and our society. So thank you very, very much. And if you are as fired up, as bullish about this as I am, this is what we can do to move our society forward. And I encourage you to go get the book, review the book. If you've read it, please write a review on Amazon or elsewhere, because those reviews do make such a huge difference. And tweet it up so that you can win a copy of it, hopefully, as well. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Margot. That was really, really cool. For everyone, I dropped the hashtag and the tag. Please do tweet. We are raffling off one copy of her book to a lucky winner. So tweet up a storm in the next 24 hours. And before we go to our sort of speed dating breakout rooms thing that we always do at the end, we do have some questions. So let me start here. From Xenia, we had, how can content strategists and UX writers foster the need for vulnerability when they're far away from the C-level?
I think that we can look at that even in the context of like lower level copy that maybe folks in the C-suite aren't even aware of. But what we look at when we're looking at FAQs on a site, or if you're more in charge of product descriptions, or even just instructional copy in an application, you know, the stuff that tends to fly below the radar. I think when we take a tone in that is overly self-assured or attempts to be overly complete without offering people a way to ask additional questions, that's a mistake. So I would say when you're looking at content like that, always give people an out. One of the examples that I share in Trustworthy, it's from a chatbot, and oftentimes organizations offer chatbots as a way to kind of fill in the gaps around missing content, or to help people feel supported even when the customer service folks aren't online. And I think what they did really well, what I love about the example, is that the chatbot is constantly saying, remember, I'm just a bot. So if this doesn't answer your questions, here are other places you can go. Here are other people you can contact. I think at one point in the script, it starts out by saying, this is still in beta, so give us your feedback. Did this answer your questions appropriately? And I think by allowing for that kind of give and take of saying, we don't have all the answers yet, but we're trying to be better, it allows your audience to lean in. It's vulnerable, but that's what I mean by prototyping in public too. It allows them to lean in and say, let me help you be better. Let me be a part of the solution.
All right. We actually have a question that sort of follows up on that. Elena is asking, how can vulnerability be applied when critics raise maybe valid concerns around the business model itself or structural issues baked into it? And then as an example, she has, for example, working conditions for Uber drivers.
Oh, that's I think a really good one. So if I was in the leadership at Uber, I think I would be approaching those issues around working conditions. And as you said, kind of the overall business structure by saying, we want to be a part of the solution. We want to be a model of doing things better, and start having more forums with some of the harshest critics, whether they are online or in different cities in which Uber operates. So first, people feel like the company is hearing them, is listening to them, and then hearing them by implementing some of that. Or even if they can't implement all of the suggestions they're getting, publicize those suggestions. Because oftentimes companies do get suggestions, get input that at first blush, they may say, sounds great, but that would be too expensive, or we could never implement that. We just don't know how, or it would require too many resources. But I think by sharing what people are saying and even saying, this is a great idea, what are your ideas to implement it? Or we'd love to find some ways to implement this, maybe on the short term or at smaller scale. That's where you start socializing people into being a part of the solution rather than just critics picking away at the company, which may be very necessary and appropriate. But I think there's still an opportunity there for an organization to say, we want to be better. We don't always know how. So help us. Let's figure that out together. And let's open up the lines of communication there.
Right. I've just, Fiona and Laura and I had some questions ourselves too. If anybody else has questions, please do pop them in the chat. But in the meantime, one of Fiona's questions that I thought was really good was she was asking whether you have sort of a step-by-step process. Like if a brand realizes, okay, we have a trust issue, we need to build trust. Is there some sort of playbook that you follow or some sort of general instructions?
So I would say, as far as like a playbook, every organization is different, and it would be arrogant for me as a consultant to come in and say, I have all the answers. That would be like the opposite of vulnerability. That said, so many organizations share a lot of the similar challenges, and I've been working in content strategy for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of those challenges. So one of the things that I always start with, kind of my first step with any organization, is by working with them to figure out first their communication goals. So I think the easiest thing, sort of the lowest hanging fruit that they can usually address, is consistency in their voice. Can they make things more consistent, more familiar, so that their audience isn't like, who is this again? Why does it feel all like disconnected? So to establish consistency in their voice, first, I need to understand their communication goals. They need to understand their communication goals. Is it most important to sound innovative or smart? Are they smart? Are they savvy? Are they witty? How do they define the differences between those terms? Or is it most important to sound reliable and established or something like that? So this is kind of like how I back up to that stuff, but in order to help them establish their communication goals, first, we put together a message architecture, and I walk them through a 3-step exercise to do that. I use a technique called brand sort, using brand sort cards. And then based on that, we'll put together a message architecture, it's a pretty lightweight document. It's usually a Word doc. So it isn't incredibly expensive to produce, but it captures a lot of thinking. It brings a lot of thinking to the table, and it brings a lot of different people to the table to say, we keep saying we want to be seen as modern. What do we mean by modern here? So that we can all be on the same page about those communication goals. And then we can establish, how do we write content? How do we create visual content that underscores those communication goals? So that when we want to be consistent, we have standards to which we can be consistent. And then we can create editorial style guidelines or visual guidelines so that we understand the metric, we understand what good will look like in the organization, and then everybody can get in line with it.
Right.
So that's usually where I start.
And that sounds like you'd be tying in a lot of different departments, like not just UX writing, but probably also people in marketing, people in PR.
Yeah, so usually when I'm having that session with them, I'll usually work with a project manager to make sure the right people are at the table. And I usually want it to be maybe the CMO or chief creative officer, some other folks within marketing. And then, yeah, it's usually some folks from PR, maybe customer service, because if they're at the front lines and kind of always talking with people that on the outside about the brand, they'll have some sense of where things should go. Sometimes it's some of their like lead researchers too, that understand something about the product. Or if I'm dealing with more of like a service industry or government organization, I'll be working with, again, folks in marketing and communications, PR and corporate communications, and then maybe some other folks that kind of are more on the periphery of that, but are closer to the customer or client.
Yeah. All right. Well, we do have one more question. It's quite long and detailed. So Maddie, I don't know if you'd like to maybe explain it yourself, or should I read it to Margot? What would you like?
Hey, thank you for the chance to talk. I'll really happily do that. I know that it's quite long. There's a bit of background that's necessary there. I will do a little bit of reading just because I have everything down. So we're quite a small team, and we create software to help manage hybrid workplaces and co-working spaces. And it's a sector that's already taken off since March 2020. And now it's kind of on fire. And it means that a lot of our competitors have gotten venture capital or angel investment, and their teams have grown massively. Their blogs have many more writers and this kind of thing. We have continued to remain bootstrapped, and we've been bootstrapped since the beginning. But we're starting to hear from some of our bigger clients that they're concerned that we're not onlining new features, especially safety features, quickly enough for them to consider us a long-term option. So even though they trust our values, there's a speed of feature release, like disconnect there. And I'm wondering how we could address that and what we could do. And I was actually just typing something else that I kind of feel like we have a small key, but we're not really sure how to share it, because we don't want people to become insecure that our team is small. At the same time, one of the reasons that our directors continue, or that our directors continue to decline investment, is because they want our team to remain happy. You know, a lot of the time, companies that do have a lot of venture capital investment, the workplace pressure tends to be a lot higher. So I know that it's a lot, and I'm really curious what you would do if you were in this situation, or how you would approach it.
So I would say that I want to make sure I understand your industry. So it's like co-working spaces, and the feedback that you're getting is that potential partners are kind of questioning the safety features in them.
So it's software to manage spaces.
Okay. So I would say that not just in your industry, but in many industries, small companies have strengths and benefits that larger competitors don't. One is that because you are small, and probably everybody's on a first name basis there, it's easy for you to kind of talk among each other and discuss like the problems that might be coming up. So I think ease of communication is oftentimes a strength to talk about. I think also telling your potential clients that, you know, if you have a problem with our software, you're not going to be calling like some call center. You can call and talk to one of us that you can know on a first name basis. And I think different ways that you can emphasize that when you're sending out emails to them, even if it's kind of like the mass email going out, sign it with people's first names. Let them start to get to know you. Maybe you spotlight different employees in the bottom of each of those emails, again, with a first name. Blog posts, let's have the author's name on there so that they can start to know who's who there. Take a look actually at the Crutchfield website, because they do a great job. Even as they've grown, you get the sense that this is a small business. It's not a small business anymore, but it still feels very intimate and almost like a family, I guess. And I know that even as I was interviewing people there, sometimes I would say, oh, I just spoke to, you know, Richard in audio sales. And the person on the other end would say like, oh, wait, which one? Because there are now 5 Richards in audio sales. But I wasn't getting that perception. To me, it still felt like, oh, everybody knows everybody. You there, though, probably can say everybody knows everybody. And I think that communicating that value, the strength of a smaller organization, can be a really good thing. I think as far as addressing some like safety and security features in the software, talk with your potential clients, with your potential customers, find out what does it for them. Is it having certain like kind of security seals in it? Is it seeing that how you're managing logins or something like that? Find out from them what they value, and then share with them the product roadmap. Make that really clear, because I think that in many business to business engagements, the thing that two main things fuel trust. One is the relationship that someone has through the sales process. And as a small company, you have a lot more flexibility to support that kind of relationship. And the other is knowledge that you understand how the product is evolving and that it will continue to evolve to support your needs. Because if you're buying for your business, you don't ever want to feel like you made a bad choice, that your CEO is going to be upset with you. And I think the more that you can communicate the product roadmap, how you're bringing in new security features to a degree that feels okay with maybe any investors that you eventually have and all, or with your board, the more that you can share that, the more your clients and potential clients won't just feel like they're at the receiving end of your software. They'll feel like partners in its evolution, that they feel smart and more confident that they know where it's going.
Thank you. Yeah, we're always a little bit scared to publish our roadmap because we feel like we're giving people ammunition to perceive us failing. So I like the way that you.
So if I could share just one other example that maybe you can share within your organization. One of the big companies that I included in Trustworthy is TED, the conference, the web platform of videos and all, because they were having problems, not so much around security, but around accuracy of information, where they were starting to get a lot of criticism for certain videos that were being scorned by the scientific community because maybe they sounded great, maybe the speaker sounded wonderful, but it turned out the information they were sharing wasn't accurate. And other people in the scientific community were saying like, whoa, sounds great, totally wrong. In other cases, TED was getting feedback that as science had continued to evolve, some of their older videos were no longer accurate. And the criticism was pretty harsh. People were saying, this is, it's not like a real site that you should use as a resource. It sounds great, but it's stupid. And their solution was to bring their critics closer. So it might be something that you could consider. They convened a forum of critics to say, all right, we know that some of our videos are just plain wrong. In other cases, we've got a few videos that are no longer accurate because they've become outdated and obsolete. What do you think we should do? And that's kind of the process of co-design. Not to say that your audience always has answers, but you can allow them to feel a part of how you get at the right answers. And they got feedback that allowed them to think, all right, we're going to keep some of these videos still on the site, but let's add in some new content types where we can put them in context with a note that will appear right below the video that says, this has been deemed no longer accurate, or when this video was published, it was correct, it no longer is. Go here to read more about the science that this author is, or the speaker is discussing, and then go here to see a more updated version from these other speakers on the same topic. So they established new rules around adding context. What happened, though, in the process of establishing those rules was that they brought their critics closer, so that then as they were rolling out these new features, people knew that they were coming. And the people that had been their harshest critics could then become their biggest champions and cheerleaders to feel like they were a part of the solution. So that might be possible there too.
Thank you so much. I think that's great.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Margot. Also for staying and answering questions. We really appreciate it. And I think I speak for everyone here when I say it was a really, really great talk, really informative, and we loved it, right?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
More than, yes.
Exactly. See all the hearts going up. So again, check out Margot's book, tweet about Margot's book if you want to win a copy. then also, if you want to talk, I forgot to mention that, I think, if you'd like to talk at our meetups, get in touch with us. We are on LinkedIn, we are on Twitter, obviously. You can also contact us through the meetup page, however you guys like. We're always looking for speakers, we're always looking for sponsors, and also to all the lovely people who bought us a coffee, thank you very, very much. We really appreciate it, so that we can do cool things like buy books and raffle them off. So for this last part, what we'll be doing is, if you'd like to stay, and there's enough people to like create breakout rooms, we'd use like a Flash network thing where you talk to each other for a couple minutes and then we mix you up again in a new room. Or if there's just a small group of us, we can also just stay here. Depends on how many want to hang out. Margot, absolutely no pressure on you to stay, but of course, we welcome you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again. It was a really great talk.